We're going to actually have fun tonight. We're going to talk about the history of subsistence, but we're going to kind of get away from that into, of course, chocolate and morale foods. In order to understand why we have a fascination with chocolate in the military, you have to understand where we came from as far as the morale foods go. As Miss Alicia was saying, I'm the curator out at the Quartermaster Museum. Does anybody know what a curator is? What is it? What is it? Exactly. Someone that takes care of collections. Think about this. If you look around this room, every single thing that you lay your eyes upon will turn back into dirt at some point. Guaranteed. Going to happen. It's my job to make that take as long as possible. All right. So what we do is we take care of all these artifacts so that hundreds of years from now, other people can see stuff. So, and we also get to do cool stuff like this and do lectures. So with that, let's get into the history of morale foods. So when we become the Army, in the 1775. All right, we start with the U.S. Army ration in 1775. Who establishes the Army ration? Does anybody know? Quartermaster. Not the Quartermaster. No, actually, we didn't get a say in that until about the 1880s. All right, who better to know nutrition? All right, so Congress establishes the U.S. Army ration in 1775, and the very first thing they do to save money is they eliminate all fruits and vegetables. We don't need this. All right? So we go to these rations that you see. If you ever read the history books and you look at those rations and you think, how in the world could anybody survive on that? Well, they couldn't. So that was one of the ways they saved money. Another way is they basically took us to 2 meals a day. You had breakfast at 0700, and you had dinner at noon. Okay, so you wouldn't actually eat again from noon all the way until breakfast. Hence the name break fast. All right, and so it wasn't until about the 1880s that we added a third meal called supper. That's why if you ever asked any of the old timers, they always say it's breakfast, dinner, and supper. All right, we didn't start calling that other meal lunch until about the 1950s. All right, so we eventually go to 3 meals a day, but before that, our first thing that we're going to talk about is the spruce beer. All right, that's part of our very first ration. Now, okay, we think, well, how odd that we would have beer as part of our ration. Any idea of why? Preserved. It's preserved. That's a big one right there. Okay, even the cleanest water, if you barrel it up and ship it somewhere, it's eventually going to develop algae in there. All right. But with that beer, it will actually last a while. Okay, there's also another thing. When you create beer, what do you do? What do you do with that water? Boil it. You boil it. We found out accidentally that whenever people drink nothing but beer, they're actually much healthier than people that just drink water. And so as the colonists came over here, they actually started talking with the Indians that were here, a lot of the American Indians that were here, and they started picking up a lot of the recipes. One of the recipes that a lot of the locals around here used was a spruce recipe, and they found that spruce actually had a medicinal property to it. Now, of course, being the enterprising colonials, we decided to basically boil it and make a beer out of it, which basically took all the medicinal properties out, but we created beer. All right, so we started issuing that stuff out, and that actually hung around with us well into the beginning of the 19th century. All right, so we've got beer. All right, how much better could it get than beer, right? So in about 1821, we introduce rum into the ration. Why rum? Why did we switch from beer? Any ideas? To the gentleman in the back? It's even more well preserved than beer. All right, beer will only last a certain amount of time. Your India Pale Ale, okay, that right there is basically one of your longest lasting beers, but that will only last so long. Rum, however, can actually last a lot longer. Okay, so we actually not just us, but the British military as well, we develop rum. Now, do we have any enterprising, really adventurous individuals in here? Anybody? Anybody want to try a good 19th century rum? A little taste test? Anybody? All right. So here's what we're going to do. Would you be willing to pop that open and give anybody a sample that would like one? All right. So what we have is a very early rum. Okay. If you ever decide to go to the ABC store down the street, you'll look for it's called Pusser's rum. Okay, sounds nasty, but what it is actually the company that made that is the same company that's been making it for the British Navy since 1655. All right, they started making it, and it was actually not open to public sale until 1970, and then they started allowing the public to actually buy it. So that's as close as you can get to a good 19th century rum. All right, and I mentioned up here that very rarely did soldiers drink straight rum. They would actually make what was called bumbo. Anybody ever hear of that before? All right, so if you take a little bit of nutmeg and you sprinkle a little bit of nutmeg in there and a tiny bit of lemon juice, you create bumbo, which has a much better flavor. And so I highly encourage you all to give that a try. All right, so we develop rum, or we introduce rum into the Army. Becomes a staple with the Army, but then eventually, as the 19th century progresses, we start to take on the attitude of man, we really got to look at getting away from alcohol. All right, and it's actually the president himself, Andrew Jackson, that introduces an executive order which eliminates rum from our ration. Was the Army went up to Hoboken, New Jersey, and bought out a tea processing plant, and we started processing and roasting our own coffee to the tune of about 420,000 pounds a day. All right, so we started with that. We started fielding our own coffee at that point. But then World War I rolls around, and we start sending troops overseas. Okay, so now the shipping on this, we have to ship this green coffee up to New Jersey, roast that stuff, put it on another ship, and ship it to France. Okay, it's not very cost effective. So what we do is we actually cut out the middleman on that, and we buy 36 of these little 4-barrel individual roasters, and we send those over to France. And so then what we do is we just directly ship those green coffee beans all the way over to France. It's kind of crazy. We were roasting our own coffee in France. So we were roasting all that stuff, and the Quartermaster Department, Quartermaster Corps at that point, begins to realize that they're starting to save a lot of money. In fact, they saved to the tune of about $6 million per year by sending the coffee straight over there. It also saves space. You know, that's space that you can spend on sending ammunition or troops or whatever. Coffee becomes this big thing, and we keep that around. Of course, it's still around, right? All right. So what we have to do is we have to improve it a little bit. Coffee really doesn't change much until World War II. And then we really start to make some big changes, because as we are gearing up for this war, we're realizing that sending coffee beans isn't going to work. Okay, if you look at the original rations and the stuff that we've got on that back table after we get done, you'll notice those boxes don't have a lot of room for coffee beans. Okay, they're round, they're not square, they're not going to be space effective. And so what we do is we create water-soluble coffee. All right, so what is water-soluble coffee? Does anybody know? It's instant coffee. How do we make it? Do what? Well, not how do you make it, how do you create it? There you go. Yeah, we all know how to make coffee. Do what, ma'am? Today, that's kind of what we do. In essence, the old way of doing it is you'd make a pot of coffee, you boil it down to where there's basically no moisture left in it, and then you use those, the essence of that coffee, and that's what you pack and send out. So when you add water to that, all you're doing is just adding water back into that coffee that you had created. That becomes a huge thing. All right, so down to the point of where we made 258 million pounds for the Army during World War II. Now, what's really interesting is when all of this food research and development that we do isn't just for us. We had one research and development facility for all the food, and that was for all the branches. The Army did all the testing, all of the research for every branch. So you would see on Navy ships, you would see Army D-ration bars as emergency rations, which we'll cover those here in a little bit. So all of this research and development is for the good of the entirety of the military. All right, so we've got water-soluble coffee. And again, coffee is the only thing that we've got that's actually warm until a little further into World War II. In 1941, we introduced bullion. Okay, now we all know bullion cubes, all that fun stuff, and they were already around at that point, but they hadn't been introduced into the rations yet. So what happens is in its current form, we couldn't use it. So the Subsistence Research and Development Laboratories, they take that and they start to take that product and make changes to it. They add vitamins and minerals and all this other stuff, and we start mass producing it. We mass produce it to the tune of 112 million little packs that go into the K rations, and we also produce basically 1.6 billion cubes for the United States Army at that point. So bullion is introduced as the second hot drink that you can use or that you can get. One of the other big additives to this, one of the positives to this, is that it's high in salt content. Okay, at a time where all of your soldiers need to get that extra salt, and we're issuing them salt tablets, which they all hated. It was a way to get them to get a little bit more salt into their diet, and it was very, very well liked. So where do we go from there? How could it get any better? Synthetic beverage powder. Now, doesn't that sound good? All right, so we actually other companies had already created some of these synthetic beverages before with synthetic lemon juice, synthetic orange juice, and such. And so what happens is we take that. It doesn't work for our rations. So we take that, we work with the company that developed that, and we start to process it. We add vitamin C and a bunch of other things, and we add sugar to it. And sugar was a huge thing in Army rations. I don't know if you all know that or not. And so we start to add sugar to it, and we create this modern beverage powder. Now, of course, if you talk to any of the World War II vets, when they talk about lemon powder, they refer to it as battery acid because it was absolutely as foul as could be. They were saying, you could clean your utensils with it. It felt like it was going to eat through the bottom of your cup. But some of the other ones they really like. So what happens at the end of the war is that a lot of our surplus, okay, everything from tanks to jeeps to planes, you name it, all gets sold off at auction. Same with all of this stuff that we create. Okay, there's a whole bunch more. Like I said, like I was telling a few of you, you could do an entire doctoral thesis on the development of food for World War II. So we're going to keep it kind of short. But with this stuff, we end up selling it off on the War Surplus Board, and one of the companies that helps us develop it, they actually buy it all, and they actually put it back out on the market in the 1950s as Kool-Aid, exactly.